Welcome to the Parsha Perspective. Each week, we will delve deep in a weekly Torah portion to find a practical and insightful way to enhance your daily life. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Rabbi Shalom Yamini, and each week we will look into the weekly Torah portion to find practical and insightful ways to enhance your daily life. This week's Parsha Perspective is in honor of our homeland, Eretz Yisroel. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu, may God continue to protect our brave soldiers, and may God comfort all those who are grieving and give healing to our nation. This week's Parsha Perspective is in loving memory of Edward ben Ephraim, Shlomo ben Edward, and Yerachmiel Daniel ben Gedalia. May their souls be uplifted, and may their memories be a blessing. This week's Torah portion is Parshas Shemos. What is his name? Our Parsha begins the new book of the Torah, Sefer Shemos, and marks a significant turning point, concluding the story of a family and beginning the birth of a nation. The Torah sets the stage by describing the Jewish people's transition from prosperity to oppression. Yosef and all his brothers had passed on, and a new Pharaoh, rose to power, one who did not remember Yosef or his accomplishments. And as the Jewish people began to flourish and grow in numbers, Pharaoh grew fearful of their strength and influence. And he worried that their increasing population could one day threaten his reign or align with his enemies in times of war. So determined to suppress them, Pharaoh enslaved the Jewish people, subjecting them to grueling labor meant to crush their bodies, mind, and spirits. We are introduced to Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader who led the Jewish nation out of Egypt. And previously I spoke about all the different stories regarding his miraculous birth and his childhood, but I will jump to when he grows older and ventures out of the royal palace, where he sees that the suffering of the Jewish people is so immense and so painful. And during one such outing, Moshe encounters an incident that would change the course of his life forever. Moshe saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Jewish slave mercilessly. And unable to remain a bystander to the pain of his people, Moshe invoked God's holy and secret 72-letter name and kills the wicked Egyptian instantly. And the repercussions came quickly. Pharaoh discovers Moshe's actions and sought to have them executed, forcing Moshe to flee Egypt and escape to the land of Midian. Upon arriving in Midian, Moshe stops at the city well, where he encounters the 7 daughters of Yisroel, the priest of Midian. And after Moshe helps them to draw water for their animals, the sisters return home and recount to their father what had happened. Yisroel invites Moshe to his home, where Moshe eventually marries Yisroel's daughter Tzipporah and becomes the shepherd for his father-in-law's flocks of sheep. One day, while tending the sheep, Moshe notices something extraordinary: a burning bush that was not consumed by flames. And the more Moshe observed, the more peculiar it seemed, and the fire raged, yet the bush remained intact, and its leaves and its branches remained untouched. As Moshe approaches to investigate, God calls out to him and says, "Do not come closer, and remove your shoes, for the ground you are standing upon is holy." God then reveals that he has heard the cries, the pain, the suffering of the Jewish people, and has anointed Moshe Rabbeinu to lead them out of Egypt. Moshe objected, arguing that his speech impediment would prevent him from properly conveying God's holy words. But God reassures him, promising that his brother Aaron, the high priest, would assist him in his mission. And despite Moshe's humility, despite his hesitation, God affirms that this was his purpose. His purpose was to lead the Jewish people to freedom, and he was to gather his things and to take his wife and children and journey back to Egypt to fulfill his divine mission. However, a question comes to mind. When Moshe stands before God at the burning bush, he anticipates a response from the Jewish people that is difficult to understand. Moshe tells God that when he comes to the Jewish people and says that the God of their forefathers had sent him, they will ask, "What is his name?" Mashmai, what is his name? And Moshe then asks God, what should he answer? Yet this question is puzzling. The Jewish people are not unfamiliar with God, nor were they detached from the legacy of Abraham, of Yitzchak, of Yaakov. They were only 100 to 200 years away from it. That legacy, that feeling, and those people who were alive at that time. They knew who God was. Why then did Moshe expect this question to be asked at this specific moment? What was Moshe truly seeking to understand about God's role in their suffering, and what was Moshe trying to understand about God's role in their future? The Ramban, Rav Moshe ben Nachman, a leading Torah scholar, gives us a simple explanation. He writes that Moshe Rabbeinu was not questioning who God is, nor was he expressing any doubt, heaven forbid. Rather, Moshe was asking God how he wished to be identified at this moment, and under which specific divine attribute was he being sent to redeem the Jewish people. According to the Ramban, the Jewish people already knew the God of Avraham. They knew the God of Yitzchak, and they definitely knew the God of Yaakov Avinu, and simply repeating that would not clarify the nature of this new mission. And therefore Moshe asks, which name should he use? Meaning, which aspect of God's relationship with his people was now being revealed? Was this redemption continuing a familiar relationship of the Avos of the forefathers? Or was it introducing something new to their perspective, to their suffering? And God's response of Eheyeh Asher Eyeh, which is loosely translated as I will be what I will be, which is not the best translation, answered that question. It revealed that this redemption came and would come through the deeper divine presence, one that would accompany the Jewish people through suffering and remain with them through exile and beyond. And Moshe's question was about accuracy and responsibility, ensuring that he conveyed God's mission truthfully and faithfully, bringing their mission and their perspective to align with God's will and lead them out of Egypt. However, the Aruch HaKodesh, Rav Chaim ben Attar, gives us a deeper and more profound explanation. He explains that Moshe's question was not about identity, credibility, or communication, but how the Jewish people would be able to relate to God after generations of suffering. According to the Aruch Chaim, Moshe understood that the Jewish people were broken by the slavery. They were exhausted by the oppression, and when people endure prolonged suffering, they do not ask abstract questions about belief. They ask whether God is still present, still involved, and still with them in their pain. And therefore Moshe anticipates that when he arrives, people will not ask who is God, but rather which God is coming now. And the question of God's name was really a question of relationship. Was this God who reveals himself only in moments of clarity? Or this is the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the God who remains present even when he is hidden? And Moshe feared that invoking the God, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu of the Avos alone, might feel distant to a generation that has only known silence and suffering. And he needed to know how to introduce a God who can be felt inside exile and not only be remembered by the past success. And accordingly, God's answer, Eheyeh Asher Eyeh, directly addresses that fear. The Aruch Chaim explains that this name reveals God who exists with his people wherever they are. Even when the redemption is delayed and the clarity is absent, it is the name of the divine presence that does not retreat in darkness. A promise that God is not only found in moments of salvation, but within the struggle himself. Moshe was not asking for a label. He was asking whether the Jewish people would be able to survive spiritually enough to be redeemed. God's response assured him that the very experience of the exile would not sever the relationship, because the divine presence would accompany them through every stage of concealment, leading towards the redemption. And their redemption was not something that would come later. It is embedded in the journey itself. And that is why the name Eheyeh Asher Eyeh becomes the foundation of the Yetzias Mitzrayim of Exodus. It teaches us that God is not only the one who redeems at the end, but the one who remains with his people until redemption unfolds. And this lesson from the Holy Aruch Chaim is ever more relevant as Jews hesitate to live openly and to reveal who they truly are, not from doubt but from pressure. The resistance is real, and so are the consequences. And slowly a question begins to form. Has the mission changed? Has the responsibility shifted? Has God rewritten the terms of what we are entrusted to carry? And in moments like these, fear disguises itself as caution, and our identity can be reduced to something negotiable. But the truth is far greater. Even without the revealed miracles of the era of the Exodus of Egypt and Moshe Rabbeinu performing all the miracles he did, the divine presence, the Shekhinah, God himself has not withdrawn from the world. He has just moved inward. The holiness that once filled stone and gold now pulses through consciousness, courage, and conviction. The godliness that once radiated openly now waits to be drawn into reality through choice and clarity. Nothing has ever been lost. God's oneness is still here, undiminished and alive. And the challenge is not its distance, but it's our readiness to recognize him, to embody his wisdom, to fulfill his commandments, to learn his Torah, and allow it to shape how we stand in the world. In our daily life, it is imperative to realize that the strength we draw upon during challenge is the same strength required to sustain success. Growth is not only about reaching a goal, but about developing inner resilience that allows achievement to endure. The discipline, the patience, the resolve forged in uncertain times must remain present even when stability and accomplishment arrive. And without that continuity, success becomes fragile. Success becomes short-lived. And the same is true for fulfillment and joy. The depth of purpose felt at moments of success must also exist during the process that leads us there, even when clarity feels distant. Despair takes hold when we separate the struggle from meaning, rather than recognizing it as part of the same path. And when strength, purpose, and emotional balance remain active on both sides of effort and achievement, we build a life capable of reaching far beyond what we once imagined possible. There's a profound quote that I once read. Strength is not the absence of fear, but the decision that fear will not choose for you. Have a great weekend and good Shabbos. Thank you for tuning in to the Parsha Perspective. Check out our website, theparshaperspective.com. Send thoughts and comments to theparshaperspective@gmail.com. Till next time, thanks for listening.